So it's now my great pleasure to introduce the Honourable Joel Fitzgibbon, the Shadow Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. Now, Joel needs very little introduction. I'm sure everybody knows exactly who he is. And I asked Joel if he would, or Mr Fitzgibbon, sorry Joel, if he had something that he'd like to share to connect with the people. It's something that Joel does really, really well. And he said something that's less known about him is he's actually an automotive electrician by trade. So he spent 10 years running his own business, doing his own BAS, getting his hands dirty. And I think that shines through, that real authenticness in what he does. He also is a fan of rugby league, and he, like his father and like his son, played footy for his hometown, and he tries, emphasise tries, to play golf. So there's a conversation starter when Mr Fitzgibbon finishes his speech. So please join me now in welcoming Joel to the stage.
Well, thanks very much, Catherine. They chose wisely this year, having you MC this very important event, although when I walked in and saw you behind that desk, I thought you were running some sort of TV quiz show. And good morning, everyone, and congratulations and best wishes to our aspiring female leaders. You are emerging at both an interesting, challenging, but a time of, I think, great opportunity in the sector. So my very best wishes to you all. I said the PM's been here, and I had a bit of a look at what he had to say. And if you're here to have me say all the things that you want to hear, leave now. I won't be trying to emulate him. But it is a great pleasure to once again address the National Farmers Federation National Conference. I think it's my third. Some might say I've been around too long. But I do begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. As I said, I've been in this portfolio now for 5 years, and I find it very, very interesting that people very often ask me why. And I never like or appreciate the tone in which they ask me that question. It is as if to suggest I could be doing something more important. Well, of course, I reject that assertion. My view is that there is no more important a sector than the one that feeds us. No more important than a sector which creates so much wealth and makes such a valuable contribution to food security, both here in Australia and in many parts of the world. And in doing so, in fact, makes a valuable contribution to security and stability more generally. I love the portfolio. It's interesting, and it's full of interesting, innovative and energetic people. The sector is diverse and it's full of opportunity. Opportunities to create even more wealth and to do things even better, which is a key interest of mine. It's also full of challenges, and I'm still around because I love a challenge. After all, what's the point in being in politics if you're not prepared to work with others to both tackle the challenges and to make the very best of the opportunities on offer? 2 years ago, I was here talking about the dramatic change we are experiencing in our political environment. Particularly this week, I think it's fair to say that the pace of change has not slowed. I congratulate Fiona Simpson, who in recent days, weeks and months has demonstrated she's determined to lead a representative organisation which recognises and responds to the issues which challenge the farm sector. Issues like climate variability, issues like changing community attitudes. And in a recent address to the National Press Club, and again this week on a national radio program, Fiona rightly sent a clear message that if we want the food and fibre sectors to reach their full potential, we need an overarching strategic plan to get there. I welcome the NFF's Roadmap 230 document. It's a quality piece of work with sensible ambitions, and I'm right on board with the $100 billion target. Indeed, I think working together we can do even better. But Fiona, and I say this in the nicest possible way, that's enough reports now. Enough reports now, at least for a while. It's now time to act, not just talk. We don't have a moment to lose, and I'd love the opportunity to drive that overarching strategic plan for the sector. The truth is, I now have enough reports to cover more than a very large desk in my Canberra office. Most of them high quality, including, relatively recently, the NFF's blueprint for Australian agriculture, the former Labor government's National Food Plan, the NFF's Talking 230, and the Rural and Industries Futures Report, which talked a lot about disruption and change, which is something I want to focus on this morning. Now, you won't be surprised to hear me say that I put the 2005 Agriculture White Paper in a different category. In my office, it's filed under F for failed. The better reports vary in focus, volume and quality, but most say basically the same thing, that the sector faces both enormous challenges and opportunities, but that if we're working together and we do it right, the future is very, very bright. Each of them has some focus on at least 8 common themes: new and improved export market opportunities, research, innovation and technology, sustainable profitability, competitiveness, workforce, branding, our capital requirements, and biosecurity and traceability. Now, these are all critical issues for the sector, and they are certainly priorities in my own mind. But I'd like to touch base this morning on just 3 which I believe deserve more attention and more energy. The first is changing community attitudes and consumer preferences. The second is climate change and sustainable profitability. The third is the quest for premium markets. We're all familiar with the way innovation is disrupting markets everywhere. Ride sharing, Airbnb, have a look at the media landscape. Change is everywhere. But innovation, of course, is not the only disruptor. Changing community preferences is the other. Indeed, of course, they go hand in hand. But more and more than ever before, people are becoming more discerning about the products they eat. They've always wanted high quality, clean and safe product, of course. And over recent years, they're becoming increasingly focused on the relative health benefits of their food. But increasingly, consumers want to know that their food has been grown in a sustainable way and in a manner respectful of animal welfare. So on that first point, in their minds, if the production of the food involved large-scale land clearing and the threats to native species, use excessive amounts of water, or left our limited soil resources depleted, then for them, it doesn't cut the mustard. And if it relies on animal cruelty to be profitable, then they'll increasingly reject it. And the bar is being set even higher by the retailers. The fast food chains are increasingly producing vegetarian and vegan menus. Just this week, Richard Branson revealed that his Virgin Group are trialling less quantities of beef on their in-flight menus. So these are trends not just confined to the Australian market. So those operating in the various meat sectors face a particular challenge, and the best response to it is to further build upon the sector's reputation on the sustainability and animal welfare fronts, and I accept and I'm pleased that good work is already being done, but we must continue the focus. And we have to build upon and maintain public confidence in our regulatory regimes. Politicians and industry leaders alike have a role to play in maintaining promoting that confidence. And at the risk of sounding a little too partisan about it, I have to say the current government is not doing much of a job of it. The worst response from politicians is one which attacks and demonises those who raise environmental and animal welfare concerns and seeks to defend the status quo, no matter what it looks like. Because the fact is the status quo does not always look good to many, many consumers, and they're voting with their feet whenever they can if their expectations are not met. Rather, the government of the day, hopefully with the support of Her Majesty's opposition, must anticipate change and work with those in the sector to move toward sufficiently moving quickly to accommodate growing opposition to what are seen as outdated practices, whether we like that or not. That's the best approach for the sector because it helps those who might be lagging, and it prevents those lagging dragging down those who are already doing plenty, who are accommodating changing community expectations and attitudes. That's the great lesson to be taken from the debacle in the live sheep export trade, where a few bad eggs made it nigh impossible to secure and maintain the social licence the industry needs. But there's another message to be learned from the live sheep export trade. Often those purporting to be your best friend can actually be your worst enemy. When a minister gives an unqualified green light to an industry, he eventually becomes not the industry's best friend, but the industry's worst enemy. An unqualified green light, that approach promotes the wrong culture within industry and breeds risk-taking, or worse, contempt for reasonable community expectations and regulatory standards. It's a story that never, ever ends well, no matter who's in charge up on the hill. We are 7 years into a terrible drought. The impact on many farming families has been devastating, and all our thoughts remain with those affected. The severity and length of the current drought must be both a wake-up call and call to arms for all of us. And if our recent experiences don't put an end to the complacency, policy complacency and policy inertia, then I don't know what will. We must stop treating drought like an abnormal event, and we must immediately get serious about both carbon mitigation and adaptation. They are basic prerequisites to any serious government response and indeed industry response to drought. 5 years into government, and after abolishing the COAG committee charged with drought policy reform, the Prime Minister is about to hold a drought summit. Indeed, it's tomorrow week. To be meaningful and to be taken seriously, that drought summit must focus on our natural resource base. We need to find better ways of ensuring we are using those limited resources sustainably and efficiently. We need market-based mechanisms designed to ensure they are being allocated to the production systems where they'll produce the greatest return for both our farmers and for our economy. No farm enterprise can succeed without adequate water and healthy soil resources. Of course, the two go hand in hand because healthy soils are great absorbers and holders of moisture. High levels of carbon and other organic matter result in greater water retention and higher productivity and therefore higher profitability. The summit should not spend too much time talking about dams, too often a distraction. We know where the viable water infrastructure projects and opportunities are, and we have a political settlement on the rules which balance the trade-off between consumption and environmental flows. We should not be wasting precious time revisiting these issues in what could be a very important conversation. There is no shortage of successful land management systems designed to rejuvenate our landscapes, and many farmers are already embracing them. But sadly, many are not. The summit must answer the key question. How do we improve the uptake of these practices? Surely government has a significant role to play. Extension is a disappearing function of government. We have the vehicles in place. We have the vehicles in place now. Our agriculture-based RDCs, our natural resource management groups, and state-based land services authorities. We just need some leadership and determination to mobilise them. It will take some money too, but every dollar invested in that project will offer a far better return for the taxpayer than any dollar spent on crisis-driven in-drought assistance. The summit should spend some time reflecting on the various tax incentives that help farmers put money away in good times and to build feed storage, efficient water systems and other drought adaptation infrastructure. We do need to better understand which are working best and which are best targeted at the problem. Finally, if there aren't at least as many non-farmers, including economists and scientists, as there are farmers and industry leaders at the summit, then the summit is likely to descend into a political conversation that takes us nowhere. So we'll know the likelihood of the summit's success or otherwise well before it begins. We'll know the likelihood of that success when we see the agenda and the list of attendees. Sadly, I'm yet to be invited. I've spoken about the health and allocation of our natural resource space, but no matter how we care for them and allocate them, our capacity to grow and produce more will be limited in the short and medium run at least by the finite nature of our natural resources. In any case, a business model based primarily on greater volumes into increasingly competitive export markets in which we are increasingly price takers offers only limited success. I note diversity is the theme of the conference. So how do we earn more without growing a lot more? The answer, of course, is a greater and more energetic pursuit of premium markets. We have an excellent value proposition here in Australia, an excellent value proposition. We can't be the food bowl of Asia, of course, because, again, the break on our volume capacity. But we can be its deli. We can be the seller of high-quality goods into premium export markets. Our collective efforts, government, industry, and importantly, research organisations, should focus more on adding value and securing better margin for our products. Now, I'm not suggesting none of this isn't already being done. Of course it is. What I'm saying is that if I were given the opportunity to be your minister again, anticipating and adapting to changing consumer attitudes, climate adaptation, the management of our natural resource base, the pursuit of premium markets, and the science and innovation which will deliver those outcomes would be key priorities for me. So too would biosecurity and the protection of our key competitive advantage, which is our reputation as a provider of clean, green, safe, high quality and ethically produced product. But in keeping again with the theme of the Congress, diversity of ideas will be critical to the success of the food and fibre sectors. So my view is just but one. It's no more or less important than the view of other key stakeholders. Now, over the course of the past 5 years, I reckon I've been a pretty good listener, and I'm determined that I'll continue to learn. And I've come to the conclusion that you'll always learn in this portfolio area of responsibility. But in the end, the investors and the risk takers are you and those in the private sector, not government. It's the private sector which drives and creates wealth in our economy and in our communities. But of course, government does have an important role to play too in the provision of that strategic guidance and building the right investment environment, producing an efficient regulatory regime, providing the infrastructure which supports you, and laying the foundations for a fair and rewarding trading environment, including, of course, on export markets. So we need to work together, and I look forward to working with you into the future as we all together pursue our joint aspiration for the food and fibre sectors. I wish you the best for the balance of your conference. Thanks, Catherine.
You're happy to answer a couple of questions? Yeah. So Joel's happy to answer a couple of questions if anyone in the audience would like to engage. Yeah, there's one.
Tony Ma.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks
This is
so
a
much.
Dorothy Dixer I organised before I came on stage.
It's actually not. I wish we should have organised one. Joel, I was just thanks. Firstly, thanks so much for coming along. We really appreciate you being here. And as you say, you've been here to 3 of the last congresses. So, Joel, I'm just interested in your comments on biosecurity. It is obviously a key risk for the agriculture sector. Have you got any insights into the further work, further commitments that you might do should you get to be the minister sometime next year?
Thanks, Tony. I've said many times that in the short period I was the Agriculture Minister, I shouldn't make the joke because too many of you heard it before, but I describe that as the golden era in Australian agriculture. I came to the conclusion very quickly that biosecurity is the most important thing the Minister oversees, and that probably 60% of the Minister's time, when you're talking about submissions and other paperwork, is around biosecurity. If I became the Minister, my first meeting with the Departmental Secretary would have that at the top of the agenda, and my question would be, what are we doing well, what are we not doing well enough, how much are we spending, how much we need to spend, where can we save the money, and if we can't, how do we get more money out of the centre? It's pretty clear we've been underdoing biosecurity in recent years. It's pretty clear that following the reform of the Act, we haven't sufficiently transitioned the industry to the new Act, or indeed properly trained departmental officials and others to implement the Act. So there are some very big holes. In the wake of the Wendy Craik report, the government has moved to raise some additional revenue at the port. I'm looking at that at the moment. I'm concerned about it because it's not what the government said it was going to do. It's a tax across all imports, not just container, and it's causing some nervousness in industry. But we'll need plenty of money because, again, there's no role more important. If we lose that reputation by having an outbreak of a disease, for example, we will be in all sorts of trouble, and everything we do will be second to that problem.
Time for one more really quick one and a quick answer.
Oh, Catherine just gave me a really subtle hint that I need to shorten my answers. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks very much. Joel, Tony York, WA Farmers.
Tony,
Seen
good to see you.
Good to see you again. So I should put my hand on the table. I've been talking to Joel a little bit alongside many other politicians in the last 3 or 4 months in terms of the live sheep trade. So I take on board your comments that you made on that issue. I'm just also wondering if you can just highlight where you think your government might go in terms of a chair for the animal welfare, in terms of there has been some conversation about how that might get managed, or an independent office for animal welfare, whether you can just elaborate on where you think you might go.
Thanks, Tony. I will try to be brief, Catherine, but I'm just going to preface my answer by saying that my political opponents like to remind me of a pause in the live cattle trade in 2011, a pause which lasted 4 weeks and put the cattle trade on a sustainable footing. That's why we're able to give the live cattle trade such strong support now. The live sheep trade has now been suspended for more than 18 weeks. 18 weeks. We have hundreds of thousands of sheep stranded basically on farms in Western and South Australia. This government needs to move. On the broader issue, I've said a few things. We will restore the Inspector General for Animal Welfare and Live Animal Exports. If we had one, if Barnaby Joyce hadn't abolished the position I created, we might not have had the mistakes we saw in the live sheep trade. And I want to move to an independent office of animal welfare, which would be a creature of COAG, because let's face it, the bulk of the animal welfare issues are in the jurisdictions of the states. So if you're going to do this thing properly and make it as light touch on industry as it can possibly be, then you do it at the COAG level. I think this is a great protector for the sector because it allows governments to say, we have an independent process, we're doing this at arm's length, the matter's being investigated. If you have that, you build confidence in the sector and you make all parts of the sector more sustainable. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Joel. So fantastic, Joel. Thank you very much for spending some time with us this morning, and also Natasha for coming along. Some of the key things that I pulled out of Joel's presentation is that he understands the importance of the NFF, and he gave credit to the NFF vision, which is really heartening to hear that all sides of politics are supporting that vision, because without a plan we don't know where we're going, and that plan really clearly articulates what it is that we're planning. Just as a side note, Minister, or not Minister, Shadow Minister, there's a little piece of paper outside near the registration desk. If you guys would like to sign it on your way out, it says you support where we're going, so we'd appreciate that. Some of the other things that Joel mentioned was the 3 key things, which is community expectations and the fact that we really need as an industry to work towards that. And if you had time to stay, there's an entire panel session this afternoon on social licence and how we're actually going to work towards maintaining that, being better communicators. As agriculture, we recognise that we're a very small part of the voting public, and so we need to communicate better and more proactively to meet what they are expecting. That is a new change, but it's one that's very real and not going away. Climate change and sustainable profitability, and also developing premium markets. We must work together, which sometimes seems easier than it actually is, but sometimes the hard decisions need to be made to protect the industries in the long term, and that message came through loud and clear as well. And some of the things you mentioned that you would be really keen to focus on and work with industry is Rangelands, or not Rangelands NRM, that's a company from where I'm from, natural resource management, science and innovation, biosecurity, premium markets, community expectations, amongst a myriad of other things. So if you are to be lucky enough to be our Ag Minister at the next election, we welcome working with you together with the NFF, which represents heaps of stakeholders, to make it easier for that communication pathway.